Caravela Coffee Talks are back, a space created to speak with thought leaders, to exchange knowledge, and share perspectives.
In these talks, the relationship building team invites you to attend sessions with female leaders in the industry.
We will hear about their aha moments, life lessons, breakthroughs, and how we can make coffee better together.
Over the years, we have seen how the representation of women in the industry has gained traction and has flourished. Join us for some inspiration.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. This is Marisabel Vasquez, Marketing Manager at Caravela.
I am Ana Sofia Narvaez, Relationship Builder at Caravela.
We want to welcome you to a new episode of Caravela Coffee Talks, Women Make Coffee Better. More inspiring women, Ana. Tell us a little bit about it.
Another great conversation. So we had the chance to speak with Taya Brown. She is from the United States, and she plays many roles as well in the coffee industry, but especially she is an agronomist, researcher, and Ph.D. She is also the founder of the Fuego Coffee Project in Guatemala. She holds a bachelor's degree in organic agricultural food systems and plant biology with a minor in horticulture and soil science from Washington State University, and a Ph.D. in horticultural science from Texas A&M University. So very inspiring, and looking forward for our listeners to hear this conversation.
Taya is absolutely passionate about production systems, nature, plants, science, and this led her to work in coffee, especially working directly with small-scale producers in San Pedro y Epocapa in Chimaltenango, Guatemala.
Taya shares a lot of insights and her experience working directly with small-scale farmers. So we hope that you enjoy this conversation and get inspired.
Today, we are pleased and honored to be here with Taya Brown. Taya, do you want to introduce yourself? Please tell us a little bit about who is Taya, and yeah, a little introduction.
Yeah, I can tell you a little bit about how I got into working in coffee. I was very interested in being in international locations. So in my 20s, I would just go backpacking in different places. And I spent a lot of time in Mexico. I backpacked from Mexico to Panama one time. So I went through Central America. And when I was there in those places, meeting people and learning about culture and food and going to the markets, that's where I felt the most sort of at peace, or I was the person that I wanted to be, in this life. So I came back from some travel and decided to go into school to hopefully be able to spend more time in international locations. And I was really interested in food production, food security, and sort of there's a meeting place between the geology of a region. I've always been kind of a nerd. I like rocks and plants and animals and stuff, right? But also the culture. So agriculture and food kind of sits right between the natural landscape and the humans that live on that landscape. So I wanted to, spend more time in that space. So I went to school to study international agricultural development, plant biology, and organic farming. So I have my bachelor's degrees in organic farming and organic food systems and plant biology. And then I just completed a Ph.D. in horticulture, which was more in coffee. So when I showed up to grad school and said, I want to work in international locations on food security issues with marginalized populations, there was a program starting in coffee. Well, there was a program in coffee there, and there was a project starting that was to deliver a Centro Americano coffee hybrid to several communities of smallholder producers in the Guatemalan highlands and the southern highlands of Guatemala. So I got really lucky. That was a World Coffee Research project. World Coffee Research started at Texas A&M University. And when I was there, they were still there. When I was just starting, they were there for a couple of years. So This was their project. It was funded by the Starbucks Foundation and carried out by World Coffee Research and Ana Cafe in Guatemala. And I got to do an evaluation of that project to identify the obstacles that those communities of smallholder producers were facing, and then to try and see if that new hybrid of coffee was meeting the needs that they had. So, producing a high quality coffee and producing higher production levels, having higher production levels, and if they were able to actually reach, markets with that coffee. And so that was what I did, was study sort of that interaction with that project, the hybrid, the people. And then I got a grant to spend 2 years living there. So I was there off and on actually for about 5 or 6 years now. But that grant allowed me to live there instead of like flying down, doing an interview, leaving, flying down, meeting people, leaving. So I actually was able to relocate for a good portion of the Ph.D. program and just live in Guatemala. So I became very close with the people that I was working with, as that were like the subjects, the participants of this project, or the recipients of the hybrid. So I became very close with them. And then the volcano erupted, and it erupted right over the top of Yapocapa. San Pedro Yapocapa is the region in Chimaltenango where this project was. It's about an hour from Antigua. Usually people have been at least to Antigua, maybe like 2 hours from Guatemala City. And the volcano, we're in Yapo, we're right on the base of the volcano, like Las Faldas, right at the base of the volcano. So when it erupted, it sent a lot of sand and ash over all of the coffee. And by then I knew people in the industry who were saying, we want to help the farmers, like, what can we do to help? And I knew a lot about the obstacles that those particular producers were facing because of my studies. So I started a small nonprofit organization with another collaborator who had also been spending some time in the region. He's a documentarian, so he was down in the region filming, getting footage of some very similar issues to what I was studying sort of scientifically. So we joined forces and started a small nonprofit. And now we've had that for about 4 years, 3 years, since 2018, we started that. And so now I've graduated. I'm no longer a student. And I'm looking to carry forward the project that we started, to maintain the relationships with the producers, which have been just so valuable for me. Like, they're like, my good friends, and see what we can do to keep sort of the spirit of the original project going forward, to help the producers gain access to markets and understand specialty markets. One of the first things I identified, or maybe that's going to be part of the questions we talk about later, but one of the first things I identified was that they didn't really have a market for specialty coffee. So the project saying, oh, this hybrid has really good cup quality. And then I would talk to the farmers about that, like, how do you think about the cup quality, or how does that impact you? And they say, like, cup quality doesn't impact us at all. We don't have any ability to sell to the specialty market. We don't know what cup quality means. Like, we've heard the words, but that's about it. We don't know what it means. So that's kind of the mission now of this project, is to help shed light, or sort of uncover these things, that these concepts in coffee, that the people that are producing it and that generate their income from, and like their whole life revolves around coffee, and yet they haven't been a part of this side of the industry. So it's helping them understand how to target like what they're doing in the field, or processing that they're doing for the specialty market, but also like bringing them into that part of the industry, which is where it's more fun, where it's more like socially recognized. And like in the US, if somebody works in coffee, like, oh, you're so cool, but in many places where coffee is grown, that's not the case. People, like kids, don't want to be a part of coffee because it's not cool. It's hard work. It's sort of thankless work. and they never get to see the social kind of accolades or benefits from it. So that's also a big aspect. It's like that people that are producing coffee for their livelihoods actually feel like cool or like connect to that part of the industry, because it exists in the industry. It's a big part of the rest of the industry. So we're trying to, you know, get them to benefit from some of that too.
And reading through the website and all of the Fuego Project, one of the goals is to educate coffee growers on this market, the specialty coffee industry and the market. What do you think they also need to know? What is that they need to know from what's happening, well, in consuming countries and more into the specialty coffee industry?
Well, we're starting from square one in Yepo, because historically they've only ever sold coffee by volume, so, or by weight. You know, they have a 100-pound bag, a quintal of coffee cherry, or a quintal of parchment, if they have the ability to even mill the coffee. Some people don't have the ability to mill; they're not a part of an association, or their association doesn't have any mill, so they're just selling cherry to an intermediary, and we call it coyote, and then they never hear anything else about it. So starting back from, how would we even rate that coffee? What's the difference between points and flavor profile? What is a flavor profile? What is the process? So you might see on our website, there's pictures of cupping. So we've led cuppings, just like cupping 101. Like, what is a cupping? How do you do a cupping? What are you doing when you're doing a cupping? What are you tasting for? So in some of the events that we have, we'll take a pretty good coffee, and we'll put defects. So they can taste the normal coffee and they can taste a defect coffee. And then they might not even know yet which would be considered a more specialty level or a more better tasting coffee, but they now at least know that there's a difference in the flavor. So if they have to make decisions in the field, like if I say, okay, we have a specialty buyer, they want to know, or you're going to have to pick only ripe cherry. That's a whole lot of work differently. It sounds simple from our point of view, like, oh, just pick only the ripe cherry. But if you have for the last 30 years of your life been picking green, yellow, pink, red, then for me to tell you, and you're paid by the amount of coffee that you can pick in a certain amount of time, right? So you have a day and you pick as fast as you can because you're paid by how much you picked in that day. And now I say, like, okay, only pick the red ones, right? That's really different in the field. That's not it's simple, but it's not easy. So if somebody has now cupped the different coffees and they say, oh, okay, I can taste the difference between immature coffees and mature coffees. Now when they're in the field, they're part of that decision, right? Oh, I want to target so that the cup that comes out, that really clean cup, like that one that I tried. So that's an example of the kind of education, and like very participatory. Like, I don't want to be telling anybody anything that they don't want to do, right? People that participate in our projects, they voluntarily participate. And a lot of it is because this project was developed because they were asking me, like, how do we know more about specialty? How can we be involved in specialty? But we know that to be involved in specialty, there's a lot of requirements. The quality of the coffee has to be there, and there's a lot of ways to get there. Luckily, we're starting from a pretty good cup in Yepo, just as is, the way things are. But what are different things that we can change? And it's a lot of work to do that. So, you know, people have to want to do that work. So by just giving education about what the specialty market requires, what is the conversation like with a specialty buyer? Like I said, in the past, they've only given their coffee. They like have a bag of coffee. They give it to the guy gives them money. They walk away. They never hear anything about that coffee. If a specialty buyer shows up, they're going to say, what elevation, what variety, what process, what picking, you know, was it picked in the beginning, middle, or end of the season? what kind of environmental conditions do you have, how are you taking care of the workers, and that's a whole lot of different conversation to have all at once. So if we can help people be more prepared for those conversations and understand kind of what specialty buyers will be looking for in the coffees, but also in, sustainability type issues, environmental impact, social impact, the economics, right? So those are some of the kinds of things that we're trying to help these guys sort of catch up and understand.
Yeah, that's great, because it's for them to understand the context of why, for example, why it's best if they select just the right ones. So it's for them to understand this whole context of, it's not just more work, it's better results.
Right.
I also think that it's really important what you're saying, because it's connecting really the work that they do with the result, or what coppers and buyers are able to taste, and the fact that users have that understanding, so they like, okay, now I know why the ripe cherries, or why I shouldn't, what's the impact of picking the unripe ones. If it is better if I wait. And then the fact that they learn, but they also can become like educators to other people in their community. So like they come with more knowledge, and that really empowers them to have those conversations, like you said.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it. It's either work, or it's work that's targeting certain results, right? And if you don't know what you're aiming for, then it's just work. If you know what you're aiming for, then it's more like, oh, I'm modifying what I'm doing to target these results. And that's a much better feeling situation. And people in the US have to understand that there isn't a local coffee consuming culture the way that we experience it. People will save some of their coffee and maybe roast it like over fire on a comal, on like a big pot or big piece of metal. And then the coffee that they serve, we call it agua de calcetín, because it's like sock water. It's like if you put dirty socks in water. It's not as concentrated as what we're used to in the US. They've never had an espresso before. When we make coffee that's more like in the ways that we would prepare it in the US, we often put sugar because people are used to, it's so bitter to them, even though they do drink some coffee, some of their own coffee, or, instant coffee is really common. So they don't have a culture of like going to a coffee shop. They don't have disposable income. They're not going down to the city and going to a coffee shop. If somebody goes to the city, it's for a medical reason or to pick up supplies for your shop, or to sell back in the community. It's not to go like stroll through the mall and have a cup of coffee usually. So that's part of the experience too. It's just experiencing coffee the way the final buyer will prepare it, so that they have that in mind too, in what they're doing on the field or at the mill.
It's kind of like really connecting all the dots, right? Because it's been really focused on producing great quality, but it's true, and we're seeing it even more. Coffee producing countries also need to start growing and involving their own coffee culture and embracing it.
Yeah, and we're really fortunate in Guatemala because it's the sort of local coffee consuming culture is developing. There's a few shops in Antigua and in the city that have taken the lead on becoming specialty shops. I don't know where they've gotten their education from, because they're really good, like really good. So setting a really good example for what coffee can be. And I remember a few years ago, how fast things are changing. I have a really good friend who's a photographer, and he was saying like, oh, I never go to those fancy shops. I don't know why, like they have to be, like they think they're so cool, or, like I've always had my coffee and I just have instant coffee and it's fine. And I was saying, well, you know, it's really important for people here in this country to see how fun coffee can be, and to see how delicious coffee can be, and see all the different ways that coffee can be prepared. Otherwise, you never get that experience. And in Guatemala, coffee production is a huge part of the economy and a huge part of the household income for many, many, many rural, you know, all the way from the city way out to the most rural locations you can get. And so having all of those people that depend on coffee who have never seen the fun part of it and don't have any way of picturing where that coffee goes, you know, that's very hard. There's no place in the US where somebody would develop a product without understanding the final goal or the final buyer or the final way that that product is used. We wouldn't do that, right? And so to bring that, or to start that, to have that developing in the country is a real benefit. And we have it's very collaborative too, which is really fun. If anybody's ever been to Antigua that's in the coffee world, you've probably been to Fat Cat. The Fat Cat guys are two brothers, you know, from Paramos in Guatemala, and they've developed a coffee shop there. And they come up to our events and they make like little cappuccinos. They make like 100 cappuccinos for 300 cappuccinos for people. So they're doing a really good job of what they're doing in their coffee shop, and also being really collaborative and inclusive and sharing what they've learned and some of the like social benefits that they've seen, starting to share that with the other communities. So we're able to, you know, invite them up. They come and show up, and bring that all the way to Yapocapa, which is really fun.
And Taya, what about the scientific part? How has the scientific approach and the research approach helped in communicating and in educating and in enforcing this goal?
I think the scientific approach has really helped my relationships in Yepo. It was a social science project that I was doing, which meant that I spent a lot of time interviewing and asking questions and listening. And my approach to that research was that it was very participatory, which means that I'm not developing questions until I ask people what are good questions to ask. Right. So the people in Yapocapa were involved in every stage of even directing where we went with the research. So I first would go and say very open-ended things like, what is the biggest problem that you face in production of coffee? What is the biggest problem that you face in selling your coffee? And I just listen. Like that's the full question. And people tell me what they think the problems are. And then, so they would say, oh, profitability, we're not profitable. We're not profitable enough to, support our households just from coffee. So then we did a profitability study. And then we came back a year later and with more questions. I mean, obviously I was there, but we came back with a new study and said, okay, let's talk about profitability. Then we made big posters. We put them on the wall in the salons and in the meeting places in the communities, and said, okay, let's talk about everything you guys spend money on, to produce coffee, everything you guys spend money on to support your households. And let's talk about where your income comes from. How much do you make in coffee? How much do you make in the beginning of the season, in the middle of the season, in the end of the season? What do you do for income when you're in a non-harvest month? You know, how are you able to pay people that are helping you when you're not making an income from coffee in the non-harvest months? So we talked about all of those things to the very smallest detail that we could, and then put it all together in a study that showed profitability. And we showed that what the farmers were saying was entirely true, that they were unable to be profitable under current conditions just from coffee. So the farmers all told us, oh, we had to do other things. You know, we clean houses, we drive a truck, we have a little tienda, we raise chickens and sell the eggs or sell the meat. I go down to the city once a week and sell something or provide a service, do driving or something like that. And so we showed that they're making like very economically sound decisions, which is interesting. And then within profitability, that within that study, they talked about the costs of inputs in coffee, fertilizers and pesticides, and paying people to do things. It costs so much. So then we said, okay, well, let's understand more about that. So then we went back and we actually dug into the soil. We took soil samples, we took leaf samples, and we took fruit samples from 36 different parcels of individual people. And those are all in a lab for analysis. We also did a soil study across the whole region to understand is it sandy? Are there a lot of nutrients? Is there a lot of organic material? So over the years now, the farmers have seen they have a question or they have a concern, we come back and we go deeper into that question or concern. If we're digging a hole in the soil, anybody is welcome to come and be a part of what we're doing that day. I see how you can identify the different layers in the soil, and then you're taking a sample from each layer. Okay, that makes sense. I'm really curious to know what the results are, right? Yeah, you can take some leaves from my plants, and I want to know, do they have good nutrition? And then with the coffee, the actual fruit that we harvested, some went to the lab for nutritional analysis and some was cupped. So we can do a comparison. We're in the process of this still comparing. And then we also did another really in-depth interview, individual interview with each of the participating farmers. What exactly are you doing on the farm? What kind of decisions are you making as far as fertilization? How often are you fertilizing? What are you using? Like, what's the fertilizer rate you're using per plant or per unit area in the field? What kind of pesticides are you using? How much does each of those things cost? So we're going to be able to compare different strategies, how many fertilizations, what they're using to fertilize, if it's foliar or soil-based fertilizer, and then pesticides, and to see who's getting a better production and who's getting a better quality. And we can see the evidence in the soil and in the leaves. And I personally think that these farmers are, in their own way, scientists. They're taking information from the field, making decisions based off of that. They're doing their own kind of economic decision making based off of what kind of income they think is coming in or not coming in that year. So they're aware of these things. So for them to see the scientific process happening, I think they've really appreciated that, and that it's been, as transparent as possible. Anybody that wants to be a part of what we're doing when we're in the field, collecting leaves or something, comes and hangs out, and why are you doing that? So I think that because these guys are basically a bunch of nerds and scientists themselves, and I'm a nerd and a scientist, they've like appreciated the approach, and I feel like I connect with them, and I feel like they would say they connect with me really well because we like the same stuff. We all like to be outside in the trees, looking at bugs, looking at diseases. We're all curious about it. I just happen to have the ability to bring those samples back to the US and get some analysis done, on their behalf. So that's led to us having these really rich and great relationships. And I honestly think because we're just all a bunch of nerds,
That's great. That's great. And what has been we've talked so much about so much impact that this project is generating, but I don't know if something's missing. That what has been the impact of this project, like the whole picture, the results that you have seen in the 4 years that you've been working on it, and we already talked about how these coffee growers in these communities can learn from the industry, but now how can the industry learn from these communities as well as from this project?
Yeah, you'll see in our mission statement with El Fuego that we've sort of shifted. My initial approach was, let's bring these farmers education because they're telling me we want to know more about quality. We want to know more about which fertilizers we should use. We want to know more about which varieties of coffee we should plant. So I wanted to bring them the information because cared about them, and they were telling me that was missing from their lives and from their ability to make good decisions. Now that I've been working on that for a while, and that I've also been connected to the coffee industry, and through Texas A&M, we started the Center for Coffee Research and Education, my advisor and I at Texas A&M. And through that, I see how the industry in the consuming end of the industry doesn't think about coffee as an agricultural product. It doesn't think about coffee as a plant. It thinks about coffee as a green bean that shows up on their doorstep in a nice bag or a nice box, and they don't even consider it really as an agricultural product. That cuts out all the people behind the agriculture, all the decisions behind it. Why is it hard to have a consistent product from year in and year out? That's the number one thing that I've heard roasters ask for. They want a consistent product. Why is it so hard to have a consistent coffee? Because it's an agricultural product, and agriculture shifts from year to year. And we understand that in other products because we see them growing. We understand wheat and corn because we can drive around in our own areas and see those things being grown. We can talk to a corn farmer, but we've never talked to a coffee farmer. That exchange happens so rarely in the industry. I know there are some people that have made an effort to go and meet people, some people that have made origin trips, you know, they've gone for a week or a couple weeks and seen coffee growing. But as far as being in a dialogue with coffee farmers and understanding what the bottom line is, or what is causing things to shift, the cost of things, or the climate changing, or whatever's happening, or the decisions that farmers are making all the time about varieties or processes or all of that, that is like a black box to the industry in the US. We don't know anything about it, and we haven't really had to know anything about it. So in a way, climate change and the economic fluctuations, the sort of economic crisis in coffee is pushing us to realize that we need to know more about what's going on at coffee production. Because, you know, you read articles all the time that said like, oh, your morning cup of coffee is at risk, right? We know that there's problems going on that are impacting producers, that are going to impact the final product. If the final product is impacted, then a roaster in the US, their livelihood is impacted. So now they have an investment to go back and see what's actually going on. So in a way, that is, these problems that are happening are also pushing much better dialogue between producers and consumers of coffee. And I realized how important it is for people on the consuming end, because there's this thing where coffee goes in a boat and then it shows up, you know? So that's sort of like a curtain that is between production and consumption. So we need to lift that curtain. And I realized that how, like, I would be at SCA and people would say like, oh, I never talked to a coffee farmer, or, you know, like, give me sort of like kudos or props for, oh, you go and like spend time with producers. And I'm like, why is that weird? You know, why is it, what, everybody doesn't do that, you know? So I realized how sort of unique that kind of experience was, and that through studying the problems that are facing these farmers in Yapocapo, we have the opportunity to show what those problems are back to the industry in the US or Europe, or, you know, the global north, and actually share with them these stories so that the whole thing can not be such a black box, and we can understand why it's hard for a producer to have a consistent product, and how the amount of risk that a producer takes and the amount of insecurity that there is when the price fluctuates so much and the climate's fluctuating so much, and that they can, that people that are buying the product can understand that one consistency that they can offer is they can offer, for example, to buy coffee from the same producer for 5 years. And instead of saying like, oh, this year I want a Guatemala coffee, this year I want to buy from this other farm, this year I want a Honduran coffee or an El Salvadorian coffee, you know, so those kinds of revelations, like, oh, hey, myself as a buyer, I can offer some consistency to a producer. That's the kind of thing that we hope will come out of sharing the stories of what are going on, and at least that people would just be more understanding of each other, more understanding of the product and all the complexities that go on and the people that are behind, because just as many, if not more, people behind the production of coffee as there are in the preparation or brewing of coffee or roasting.
The more we speak about it, the more we find those complexities and understand that coffee goes beyond the cup of coffee that you drink in the morning, right? Like, it takes 3 years for coffee to be fully productive. That we need consistency, but how do we reach that consistency? And to know that it goes both ways. Like, I as a farmer do this, and then you as a roaster or as a consumer also do this, and then we are aligned and we can make something out of it, but it will take 2 years, 3 years, not just like one harvest.
Yeah.
I would like to know, how culture has shaped all this project as well, like in terms of thinking, approaching farmers, and then translating all this information to the other side of the world. I like to explore a bit more just the culture settings and kind of doing businesses and establishing those relationships with Guatemalan farmers.
Yeah. Well, that's been a lot of, that was some of the original intention behind the participatory nature of the research that I did. I just felt like I'm going to be going into these people community. I'm not from here. I'm a white kid from the US. I need to be respectful, and I need to know what it means to be respectful. So I had a guy that was, I call him like my Guatemalan counterpart for my research. His name was Daniel Dubon. He's now working at Ana Cafe. But he was a part of the WCR kind of team. And I met him on a trip to Guatemala and just said like, hey, can you help me get this research going? Because I had to learn the language. I was learning the language as I was going, and things like the cultural, like I have these questions that I want to ask, but I don't know if some are going to be sensitive or hard for people to answer. I don't want to put anybody off. I don't like the first rule of all my projects is do no harm. Right? There's no purpose in collecting information if it's uncomfortable for people, or if it does some kind of harm or makes my relationships uncomfortable with people, right? So I'll say, Danielle, like, how do I ask this question? Is this an appropriate question to ask? And do you think people will answer it? Do you think so he helped me write the questions and design the kind of the way to start the approach with the research. And then he was there during all the focus groups and interviews that we had. One of the things that I remember right off the bat, that he would spend like 10 minutes on introductions. This is a thing that I would do, a mistake that I would make, where I would say, okay, we're all here today to answer these questions. Let's get right into question one. Thank you for being here. Here's our question, right? That's a very kind of US way to do business. Okay, I know, let me respect your time, right? That's always a thing. Let me respect your time. Let me get right to the point. Danielle would say, oh, hello, thank you for coming. We're glad that you came. We hope you had a good trip here. I hope your year has been good. I hope your life has been good. I hope your kids are good. We're here to talk about coffee, and it would be like 10 minutes. And I'd be like, Danielle, we only have an hour, Now, years into spending time in Guatemala, one of the things I appreciate the most about Guatemala is people address the people first. So if I get a text message from somebody then they want to ask me a question, like, hey, can you bring me something from the US next time you come down? Hey, I found this thing on Amazon I want. They'll say, hi, how are you? What are you doing today? How was yesterday? And then I feel like I'm seen and respected as a person. And then they say, oh, I was thinking, I found this thing, can you bring it down? Right. So I've shifted my own sort of culture, I would say, to be more to address the people in the room. And I've learned that through the process. And I would have never done that if a Guatemalan hadn't been actually leading the research. And I think that's really important for people from other countries to know. You know, there's been some learning where these guys, I'm sure, have had to learn, you know, how my culture is. Like, I can't think of the exact example right now, but like, oh, she's from somewhere else, right? So we gotta to do things that way for a little bit, or answer a more direct question than we're used to, for example. But also, I've been really lucky that the people that I work with in these communities like to talk and like to share the story. So we're not, you know, they always have the opportunity to say, no, I don't want to talk about that, or, you know, I don't want a photo taken of me or something like that. But most people say like, yeah, sure, you know, I'll talk about it, no problem. Very open and genuine, and actually very accurate. You know, we've done some kind of triangulation where, okay, these people are telling me something, let me ask somebody else, or look in the news and see if that thing happened, and like really quite accurate and genuine. So I think in a lot of ways that's just lucky being in these communities that are happy to talk about even pretty personal things like their profitability. And we also take measures to be careful not to put people on the spot when we do the research. Like if we're talking about family household income, for example, I don't ask like, one, what's your family make in a year or a month? We build a representative family. So we have 10 or 12 people in the room, and we say, okay, this is going to be a fun exercise. Why don't you guys, let's make up a family, right? We'll make up a family that is representative of what the community, of a family in your community, and we'll draw them on the wall. So we put the mom, the dad, what ages would they have? What's kind of common in your community for the mom and dad? And then how many kids are common? In some communities, it's more common to have 6. In some communities, they say, oh no, more people have more. So let's say 8 or 10. Okay, let's say 9. Everybody in the room decides what seems accurate, and they make a decision amongst themselves. Okay, I say 10, I say 8, how about 9? Yeah, let's put 9. And that's how it goes. We build a representative family, and then we talk about what that family's cost might be. And somebody might say, oh, we spend this much on corn, and somebody else will say, well, my family spends this much. And then we say, okay, well, what's representative of this community? What's somewhere in the middle? What's an average, or kind of a middle ground there? And they decide what's accurate. So they get to see on the wall then their own information start to develop. And then they tell me, you know, what's accurate. And then we go from there. So there are a lot of measures that can be taken like that, where you don't put somebody directly on the spot in an uncomfortable way, but you still get really accurate information.
Amazing. I think it's also important because it allows them to connect and to maybe say, you know, I'm spending more money on this. Where are you getting your seeds, or like who is your supplier? So you can also have other type of conversations that maybe they weren't sharing some information that could benefit more farmers. And it doesn't feel like too personal, because these are personal things to speak about, right? How much you're spending, like roles in the families, they are very different. So just to come and ask, you need to understand, like you said, the culture and how to do it as well. So amazing. What has been your aha moment, like your turning point that allow you to say, I'm going to focus on this, or this is really what matters, and we should be talking about in coffee or in your coffee journey?
Yeah, that's kind of a tough question, because it's been a real evolution over time, really. And one of the things that I think is kind of funny, just, you know, personally, when I was looking at grad schools, there were some schools, and I had the 3 criteria: to be in an international location, working on food security with marginalized populations. And I remember going to some schools, and they would say like, yeah, we have an international program, but we only we work on beans in this one part of Africa. And I thought, like, I don't want to focus on one crop in one part of the world. You know, I want to focus on international development in general. I want to understand why some projects work and don't work. And I didn't want to be like stuck, I felt like, in one part of the world working on one crop. now I work in coffee in one part of the world. You know, maybe more generally globally too, but you know, my specific focus is on coffee in Yapocapa for the bulk of what I do. So it's funny that I've sort of come around, and I think what I like about the coffee industry, or what's interesting as a researcher, is it's so far behind in so many things that other crops, like the kind of research and development that other crops have had, varieties, pest control, productivity, marketing, processing, you know, in other crops, we have that, like, there's a good presentation that Hannah Neuschwander gives from WCR in the, I forget which year it is, but it's the Ireland RICO. And she talks about the number of watermelon varieties that there are in the world, and then the number of coffee varieties. And there's like 1% the number of coffee varieties that there are watermelon varieties. And coffee is so much more economically and culturally important than watermelon. To be that far behind in development it's really surprising to me. I've been surprised, I continue to be surprised by how little people understand coffee as a crop, as an agricultural product, which is exactly what it is, just like watermelon, just like corn, you know, just like anything else that we eat is an agricultural product. And so it blows me away all the time, how far behind we are in this understanding and in the research and development that comes from that understanding. So, you know, that's been a real kind of a shocker for me. And the sort of aha, I guess, is that it's also unusual to be in between production and consumption. Like, people are producing coffee and then people are roasting and brewing coffee. And I get to be, I have a foot in one end of the industry and a foot in the other end of the industry. So to be able to share information between the two feels like a really, you know, helpful place to be. And that's kind of what I wanted for my career, is to be able to, you know, help people. And obviously I want to do things that are fun and interesting for me. And I get to be in international locations talking to people about farming, walking around in the fields, looking at bugs and plants. So, you know, I get to check that personal interests of my own, but also to share this information both with the producers. We bring people, you know, from the US down to do cuppings with the farmers, to talk about processing, to talk about economics and all those kinds of things, and then to share the story of the producers with everybody else, because I'm shocked by how little that's been done. And I'm consistently surprised by how little accurate and factual information there is actually in the industry. People, roasteries put out information all the time, and I review it. And through the scientific lens, you know, in science, if we put out a publication, other scientists read it and say, like, yes, that sounds accurate, or no, change this thing, or, you know, down to details all the way to the design of your whole research, right? And in coffee, it's just not done. People say things all the time that are entirely inaccurate. They're oftentimes inequitable. The way we talk about producers, like they're not a human being, like they're not there in the room with us. Like, we feel free to say anything that we want about the way coffee is produced or the producer that's growing that coffee. And it's not the way that we would do things if we were talking about ourselves or our own family. So I think people kind of, there's a lot of like there's a pressure that people feel to have information to be able to say where their coffee comes from or something, but they don't have the information to be accurate about that. So there's a lot of just chatter out there in the world that's just not accurate. So if I could do anything, so that has been some sort of aha moments for me, as like, wow, really? Like, these things aren't known. Like, there was, for example, I watched, there was a little video on Instagram that I saw, and it was a roaster, and she was saying, she started her video saying, maybe it was like a TikTok or something, and she said, do you want to see where your coffee comes from? And I was like, whoa, this is cool. You know, like we don't really see this kind of thing. And so I watched the video. She was in a roastery in California with green beans. She put them in the roaster and then she roasted them and then she dumped out the roasted coffee. And that to her is where coffee comes from. That's shocking to me. That is not in any way where coffee comes from. Where do you think that bean shows up in the bag or in the box? You know, the truck just brings it from magic land. You know, it's not magic. There's a lot of hard work and sweat and and steps that happen, a lot of incomes, a lot of livelihoods that are all taking place that get that coffee to that step. So that's been both an aha kind of moment for me and then gives me kind of a purpose in my work. If nothing else, I hope that people understand that coffee does not come magically out of a bag. You know, it comes off a tree that is managed by usually a family, you know, even whether they have a large farm or small farm, it's usually a family business in my experience. And that we can start thinking about it that way and be more equitable in the way that we talk about it and be more factual. There needs to be more factual information out there about coffee where people can go and say, okay, I want to write a thing for my roastery, but I want to be accurate. So let me go to this source and double check my terminology, double check the way that I'm talking about this, because I'm not a processing expert. I'm not a production expert, but I want to talk a little bit about processing and production. So instead of making it up, which is what it feels like most people are doing, let's go to some source to understand what's real and factual and then write my thing, you know, from there, my publication or my blurb on my website that way. So that's a lot of kind of what I'm shifting into now is education on both sides. And we've shifted the focus, like I said, with El Fuego, we were originally started to say, okay, what the farmers need is more education. That's the mission of the project. And now where our mission is shifted to being a conduit of information from production and consumption, both. So that farmers understand how the final use of their product and roasters, consumers, importers understand the life of the coffee as a plant and life of people that are producing it.
That reminds me of the other day speaking with a 4-year-old. I was drinking a cup of coffee and I asked her, do you know where coffee comes from? And she said, from the store, but from the supermarket. But yeah, and we sometimes, like, for example, I can speak for myself, but I'm sure that Ana Sofia as well, being a daughter of a coffee grower, sometimes we take it for granted. I'm from Colombia, so I actually know that coffee is a crop. It wasn't until I met producers and I saw with my own eyes where did coffee come from that I really understood, because we could know that we can know that it's an agricultural product, but the context is way more than just that. We can, as you say, the families and how they work, how they live, and it's important to understand go way back to see, okay, how was the weather actually during the last harvest, or how were the prices as well, because we see the prices fluctuating and then people shocked because of the over $2 line. But is this actually enough for coffee growers, and do you want it to go down?
So it's I wouldn't say our duty, but it's our responsibility to really share information that it's accurate, because otherwise it's counterproductive and we're not achieving what we want to achieve, right? More transparency, traceability, knowledge about the industry as a whole.
Yeah, and I think there's kind of a Venn diagram between factual and respectful. I think both are very important, and in a lot of ways being factual is more respectful to the industry, to even the clients that you're serving, to everybody. And then we have to say, like, the number one principle has to be do no harm. You know, am I writing this in a way that that I would write about my own self or somebody from my own community, you know, or am I just writing something because I'm trying to keep up with, you know, the roaster down the street that went on a trip last year and they're talking about their trip, and now I feel pressured to talk about something myself, you know, to show that I have a connection with where my coffee's coming from. So I think it's important to check ourselves on why we're writing the things we're writing. Is it necessary to write these things? Are they factual, and are they respectful?
Agreed. And on that note, Taya, um, I wanted to ask, how do you believe that coffee companies can support the next generation of women leaders in the coffee industry, right? And how can we improve as a whole? You know, aside from learning more and really being factual, what are some other points and things that you have discovered this years?
Um, that's also a tough question. I think that in general, things are moving in the right direction for women, um, you know, in the US and hopefully around the world. I think being more inclusive, at some point you have to kind of you have to go out of your way to be inclusive of women. But it's tricky, you know. There are many instances where we've singled out women and done projects with women, and then later that actually drew attention to them that was negative, you know. So we have to be really careful all the time and evaluating the impacts of what we're doing all the time. If we're doing like a development project or, you know, a hiring project or something like that, and checking in. You know, one of the things that I've learned in the research that I've done is just check in, like ask the farmers themselves how they're doing. Ask the farmers themselves, are we talking about what's important? So asking women themselves, like what are the issues? Let's not just decide what the issues are. Let's talk about it with the people that are experiencing the issues. And that would go, you know, the same for any demographic, including women. I'm really happy to see that there is more and more just equality, you know, in general. It's kind of tricky, and I know that there are some kind of cultural, you know, pushback, or so it's something that needs to be carefully navigated. Um, but you know, I guess that's my answer, is to talk to the people that are actually experiencing the thing about what the thing is. And education really is empowerment. You can't take away from somebody when they've and travel is an education, new experiences is an education. So that's one of the things that I think we can give. You know, if we were to focus on something, like if I was to tell you just what I think as far as how to empower different groups of people is get them education. You know, let's make sure that women are getting the same access to cuppings, to share their story. I see a lot of times, and I experience it myself, the men in the room talk, and it's even uncomfortable for the women to speak up. And when you do, nobody really hears you, or somebody just reiterates what you just said, and then they get the credit for it. You know, so we have to be mindful about when those things are happening, and make sure that people are getting the floor to speak, and that they're being involved in the opportunities that there are. People may be shy. You know, we're all working against kind of cultural norms and historical foundations. And there are, you know, we're sexually dimorphic species, right? There are differences between the genders, right? They're not to say that anyone is better or not, but women in general have this cultural thing, and also may have some kind of biological thing where they're not just going to assert themselves all the time, you know? So we have to make an effort to check in with people, like, does this sound right? Do you feel like you're being heard? Hey, if we put on some classes, or we send some people on a trip somewhere, do you make sure that there's a certain percentage of women in that? Go find them, you know, go find them if you have to make sure that the opportunities that are being presented are also being presented to women. Because, you know, it's just historically, it's just a fact that men have been more involved in more in leadership roles. So to kind of pull women up, let's offer classes, you know, different kinds of education and experience, not just like an official education, like taking a class or something, like being certified in something, but let's go on a trip, you know, let's include women in that trip. Let's go on a field trip to go visit a farm or something. And let's make sure that there's a certain amount of women there, you know. And another thing that I've been appreciating more, I've never been very like gender forward with my research or anything like that. I mean, obviously I'm female and identify as a woman, so I've experienced that slice of life, you know, from the women's perspective.
Yes.
As Ruth Bader Ginsburg said, that all individuals on the Supreme Court will be women, that all 9 of those individuals will be women. And that, when she said that, was some kind of, you know, it was like nobody had ever, it was like revolutionary. It's not revolutionary. She said all 9 individuals have been men in the past. What's wrong with it being all 9 women? And there should be nothing wrong with that. There is nothing wrong with that. So I've been appreciating more, as I was saying, I haven't spent a lot of focus on gender things, but I find that I appreciate more and more, like it's all women on the call, or it's all women designing this thing. And so to foster that more and help that develop more, so that women can make connections with each other and, you know, lift each other up. And there's nothing to say that we're not just as capable as anybody else to, you know, do some kind of project or put something together. So I've been appreciating these times where it's, you know, it's just women on the call, and we're all just as capable as anybody else.
Yes, and like
Yes.
we're saying, educating, and I'm sure this conversation, as well as other conversations that we've had with other women leaders in the industry, are educating, and not only other women but other people and younger generations in the industry. So this is kind of what we like to do with this space.
Yeah, I love it.
Thank you for sharing, Taya. And I personally agree with what you said about no one can take education away from you. So, and either if it's experiences, you know, like traveling, like you said, or like a very technical skill or a soft skill, right? But no one can take that away from you. So, and that's what we need to foster as well, because it helps us be like in these places, like leading projects, making changes, having, you know, a seat at the table through education.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Taya. I didn't want it to end, but unfortunately,
yeah, thank you.
Over an hour now. But thank you so much. It was so valuable, this conversation, in my opinion.
And thank you for putting the project together.
Thank you, Taya.
Some of the next steps for us is we're going to be doing processing experiments this year. So I have a fun project that I'm putting together. There's a model that we do here with vegetables in North America, where it's called CSA, Community Supported Agriculture. And in like about February, March, when it's just very early spring for us here, farmers don't have much income coming in because they're not selling products. They're buying seed, they're paying laborers, and so they're spending a lot, but they don't have much income. So at that time, some farms will do this thing where they call a share box or a CSA box. People from the community that want to buy in and support the farmer will, let's say they spend $500. So they give the farmer in March $500, and they get a share box for the next 4 months. So starting in, let's say from April to October, every week they get a box of produce, which is a share of what that farm produces. So I'm working on a project where I want to do some experiments with the coffee processing from the coffee that we have in Yepo, to see if we can bring the points up a little bit. It's pretty good. So luckily we're starting in a good place, but we just want to see how we can change the flavor profile and if we can add some points through. So we're going to do 9 different processes. And we're getting roasters to buy in. So they're not getting pre-shipment samples. They're not doing the normal model. They're going to buy in and say, we want to share of what those processes are that come out. And then we'll be involving them in their feedback in landing on, let's say, 2 or 3 coffee processes that we want to do in the future with these communities. It's going to be an opportunity for the producers to understand what the different processes are, the cupping of them. So they'll be involved in every aspect of it. So it'll be a really good educational opportunity. Roasters and that are buying coffee, and anybody else that's interested is welcome to come and take part in this and kind of help us, tweak what we're doing or see what we're doing and, learn from what we're doing. And then those coffees, we're asking just 5 roasters right now to pre-contract 5 bags of coffee, which will be some combination of these processes that we produce that they'll get. So we're following that CSA model from vegetables in the Northwest. One of the things that I like is being able to use my knowledge of other crops and other production systems and bring it into coffee. Because I think a lot of people in coffee really just only spend time in coffee. So it's fun to be able to say, well, in other crops, they do this. Let's bring that to coffee. So we're trying this project. We're going to see how it goes. It's a way of sharing the risk that the roasters can say, we'll buy whatever you guys produce. We know we're going to get coffee, right? And we know it's not going to be too terrible because they've tried the baseline, the regular coffees. But they're not saying, oh, let me get a pre-shipment sample of this process and this process, and then I'll decide if I'm going to buy it. They're saying, we will buy a share of whatever you guys produce, and we'll figure out how to use it. It's a small amount of coffee, 5 bags. So that's one project that we have rolling out to kind of be able to talk about the risk and where that goes. Who takes the risk? There's always going to be risk in an agricultural system. The way the model is right now, all of that risk stays in production. The consumer, the roaster doesn't take on any of the risk because we have the ability to say like, oh, I'll cup that coffee. It's a half a point low. I'll take a different coffee. So we're trying to shift that and just showcase a model of something a little bit different where that risk or that discomfort of what's going to come out is shared. And so we'll see how that goes. So maybe you guys can come and be a part of that. We would love it. It's going to be a very participatory thing that we're doing this coming harvest in Yapocapa. And then if I could just say, if anybody's interested in seeing what we're up to, you can go to the delfuego.org. And I'm starting a podcast called the Coffee and Science Podcast that's coming out soon. And that's where we want to sort of, we want to talk about facts and science and evidence and real lived experience. So to try to kind of counteract some of the apocryphal, I'm coining this term apocryphal. Apocryphal is just sort of talking about things that aren't necessarily true, but putting them on as true. So apocryphal is the way our industry is now. We have the power to shift that by all becoming more informed. I have a science background. I love sharing that with people so that other people can think about things more scientifically, more evidence-based. So look for that to come out in the next few weeks too.
Awesome, Taya. Those are great projects that you're working on. Look forward to the podcast. I'm a big podcast lover, so
me too.
Yay! We have to have you both on to talk about. Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Taya, so much for your time.
Wow, a lot of information and insights shared today. We hope that you enjoyed this episode.
Indeed, Anna, very relevant. And stay tuned for next episodes coming up in the next few weeks.
We will continue featuring incredible women in coffee.
And remember, if you have missed any of our previous episodes, check them out. They are all available in our podcast platforms as well as our YouTube channel.
See you next week.